Saturday could be a big day for Dante Moore.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. I will have my 3 keys to Oregon getting a win at Iowa. Top 20 matchup, big game. I keep getting more excited and more excited. I've done like 4 different radio hits today as I'm recording the show on the game, and it's just firing me up more and more. I'm sure plenty of you feel the way. And some more thoughts on the playoff scenarios for Oregon going into this game, which is, full stop, a big opportunity for Dante Moore. Not just for any kind of national narrative or award that he'd maybe want to win. I think that's probably faded to the back burner. There are too many names ahead of him for the Heisman Trophy. But for him personally, if he goes on the road and plays the way he did against Penn State in this game against Iowa, where the weather could be nasty again, where Iowa's defense is really good and is getting plenty of credit and love. Kirk Herbstreit thinks that Oregon goes down this week. All that buzz, all the buzz, the chat. When you go and you're going about your first year as a starting quarterback, you can feel a lot of different pressures. You can feel it personally. You can feel it externally. You can feel it literally from other teams. Hopefully the offensive line keeps Dante Moore upright. But if Dante Moore goes on the road and wins this game, the confidence that I think a lot of us had in him after the first half of the season compared to what we've seen from the offense the last couple of games, I think it'll return. But you have to remember that it's got to be something that's gone up and down for him as well this season. How could it not? Because everything went so well in the early going. The offense was darn near flawless for the first few games against inferior competition. They go and beat Penn State on the road behind a great second half, and Dante played really well in that football game. And then Indiana happened, and then Rutgers happened, and then Wisconsin happened. And that's kind of been a lot of up and down. So if coming out of the bye, going into a stretch of football games that is going to be the toughest Oregon has faced all season as a 4-game span, you'd really like for Dante Moore's confidence to be pretty high, because we have seen this year, and going back to his time at UCLA, obviously he's much better now. Even when he struggles, he's better than he was back then. But this is a guy who, when things are not going well, he hasn't had enough experience to know what it takes to overcome that. That just is something that comes with time. You look at Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel. These are the sorts of differences that I expected for Dante Moore coming into this year, is that it's not always going to run swimmingly. You're not always going to have the same player week in and week out. And so if he's able to go and lead the offense to a successful day, which I believe, and I think okay, let me come back to that in just a moment, because some Oregon fans are in a different headspace with that. But I think 24 more points is a good offensive day. Now, that is contingent upon what the weather and conditions look like. Because if you have a repeat of Wisconsin and it's like that for the entire game, it's not reasonable to expect against a good Iowa defense that everything can look as it did against Oklahoma State or Northwestern earlier this year. But the confidence boost that Dante Moore could get from going on the road and winning this game, and that fans could have in him for this home stretch, would be really big. Because I'm not making any I have no qualms with people that say Oregon's going to lose to Iowa this week. I don't think it's a ridiculous take. I don't happen to agree. I think Oregon is going to win the game. I've got the Ducks coming out on top 24-13 in this spot. But would I be completely shocked or stunned if Oregon loses? No, I would not. Iowa's off a bye, just like Oregon's off a bye. So the coaching chess match at times in these big spots hasn't gone in Oregon's favor, and they've been out game plan, out schemed, and out adjusted, particularly going back to the Indiana game. And I think against Wisconsin, there was some of that in the early going before the weather really turned. But for Dante Moore and Will Stein, against Indiana, those were the primary culprits as to why the Ducks did not wind up winning the football game. It was not the defense. Atticus Sappington missing that field goal at the end of the first half was a big momentum swing, but fundamentally, Oregon didn't win that game because the offense didn't play well enough. Well, here's your chance to get it back. Here's your if Oregon goes out, and let's say the weather is kind of a factor, but not really, and the Ducks end up winning this game like 28-13, I think the confidence in the offensive unit should be really, really high. Against an Iowa defense that'll have a great crowd behind it, as we know, that is giving up just 150 pass yards a game. And think about how you feel about Oregon's pass defense this year. They're actually allowing even fewer yards. Just 125 per game is what Oregon is giving up this year. I talked earlier this week about my confidence in Oregon's defense. That starts with the secondary and the defensive line together. I think the linebackers have been solid. I don't think they've been great. Gotten better in the last couple of weeks. But overall, the three units, yeah, they're going to be the one that I have the most questions about going into this game, because I think you're going to see whether or not plenty of the Iowa run game. Like Kirk Ferentz knows, and their offense coordinator Tim Lester knows, yeah, we can't get into, an up and down, back and forth. This game won't look like their matchup with Rutgers earlier this year. And you heard Trent say on our crossover yesterday that, yeah, Iowa's defense has actually made some progress from where they were at the start of the season, because they gave up 28 points to Rutgers. That's not something, if Oregon puts up that number in this spot, I think Iowa fans will come out and say, man, what in the world happened to our defense? Because they have gotten a lot better in the last couple of weeks. But I think the Dante Moore, Will Stein narrative is a big one to watch in this particular game, because questions will continue to be raised about Oregon's OC amongst some of the fans. And I don't know that I would even try to shut those down in a big way if the offense comes out and really struggles. Again, context matters. But if the weather is not that big of a deal and Oregon just looks like they're getting out-coached and Dante Moore is lost and getting hurried and not adjusting to pressure well or making all sorts of mistakes, missing open receivers, all those things that came up during the Indiana game, if they come up again during this game, then there will be, even if Oregon wins, we could have some major questions about what the potential is for this team going forward in this push to get into the college football playoff, which I'll talk more about later on today's show. So for Oregon defensively, as I mentioned this week, you take away the Iowa run game, I think you're going to be in a good spot. I think you're going to be in a really good spot if defensively you say Mark Gronowski, go for it. I'll talk more about that later when I get to my keys to the game. But, on the Oregon side, and for the Wisconsin game and for the Rutgers game, I said for both of those matchups, this game's entirely about Oregon, not about the other team. Because if Oregon plays to their standard, they did against Rutgers, they did not against Wisconsin, then there's nothing the other side can do. I think that's mostly untrue. Not entirely, because Oregon on paper, certainly the better, more talented team. But Iowa has a greater ability to play up to their standard and that be capable of pushing you more than Rutgers or Wisconsin. The peak of the Wisconsin offense was never going to score 10 points against Oregon, especially once the rain and wind came down. And the peak of the Rutgers defense was never going to be able to keep Oregon in check unless they made a bunch of mistakes. And so in this spot, I think there's a greater ability for, hey, Oregon could play well on offense and Iowa might just make some plays on defense. Oregon might have the right play called and they do something really well and a safety flies downhill, puts a helmet on a football, makes a great tackle, pops it free, something like that. And you could look up and go, well, guy just kind of made a play. Or you give a chance to Corey Moore, Kenyon Sadiq in a 50-50 ball, and the defensive back knocks it away. You settle for a field goal instead of moving the sticks, maybe scoring a touchdown. Those are the sorts of things I think Iowa has a greater ability, plus the special teams angle as well. They've got a greater ability than Wisconsin or Rutgers to play to their standard and have that be able to push Oregon. Still, if Oregon plays the way that they're capable, it shouldn't be a sweat in the fourth quarter. Do I think it will be? It's more likely than not. More likely than not, yeah, I think Oregon has to sweat at least a little bit for a full four-quarter game. So, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Drop your score predictions. Hit me up on Twitter. All of that good stuff. The 3 keys to avoiding an upset are as follows. First, this episode brought to you by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects Oregon might punt a couple times this week. I'm sure they will, but that's not happening with Supply House. And their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. If you need parts fast for a project, I'm talking Deere Hill in the open field fast. Supply House has next day delivery. You talk about a game changer, Oregon's got a bunch on both sides of the ball. Deere Hill, Jordan Davison, Corey Moore, Kenyon Sadiq, any of those sorts of guys. Mateo Youngale, Dylan Thieneman, Bryce Betcher, Brandon Finney, those guys are game changers, and Supply House is a game changer. Join the free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. All right, 3 keys to Oregon beating Iowa. Of course, we'd all love for the Ducks to do this comfortably, but regardless of whether it is by 2 points or 6 points or 10 points, there's value in just finding a way to win this particular matchup. And key number 1 is to win the rushing battle. Now, we don't know exactly because forecasts can change, and as I'm recording this, it's a couple days out from about 48 hours out from the actual game time, a little bit less than that. So maybe things will change. But even if it's raining, or if it's not raining, quite frankly, this should still be my number 1 key. Because for Oregon, what I've talked about with the offense over the last couple of weeks, and my biggest critique of Will Stein, the offensive coordinator, is that the numbers on the scoreboard are not reflective of how much success Oregon is having on a per-play basis, particularly when they run the ball. A team that has several backs each week that can average more than 5 yards a carry, where regular success running the ball has become the norm, a team like that shouldn't struggle to put up points. And it's not going to look like Rutgers every single week. But there should be a flow. And just the disconnected nature between those two trends, I would really love for that to change. That would make me feel better about Oregon's offensive coordinator right now, who I know some fans are not always huge fans of, but I think it's also easy to forget how good he's been. This is year 3. And some of the early big games when it was the defense that cost Oregon, not the offense, was just anyway. So I think that for Will Stein and the offense, they've got to be able to have some success running the ball. And against this top-ranked rushing defense for Iowa in the Big Ten, that's going to be as hard as it has been all season long. And the offensive line going to have to move guys around. I bet Oregon has plenty of runs to the left to go behind Emmanuel Prenon, who I've said all season is Oregon's best offensive lineman. There are several good ones. Poncho is definitely second, but Prenon, I think, has been the best against both running and passing situations. So I think if Oregon's able to have success there, that bodes well for any kind of game. And then on the other side, the reason I don't just say have running success for key number 1, win the rushing battle, Iowa is not going to be able to throw the ball in this Oregon defense. Not consistently. The receivers, I just don't see how they are suddenly going to emerge and have, an Elijah Surratt type day. Like, there isn't a guy like that out there. And Oregon still boasts, even with that game in which Mendoza only had 215 yards passing, by the way, Oregon boasts one of the 10 best passing defenses in all of college football. So I don't go into this game with really any concern about Oregon's secondary and their ability to match up with the receivers or even the tight ends at times, as Trent said yesterday on our crossover, that have not been exactly where Iowa tight ends have been in the past. So I think that for Oregon, if you take away the run or at least limit it for the Hawkeyes so far this year as a team, they go for 185 yards a game. If you hold them to 150 or less, there's a world where Iowa has less than 250 yards of total offense, and I don't think that can result in more than 10, 13 points at the most if you're able to keep them to 150 or less on the ground. So if Oregon does that, and you're saying, yeah, all right, this is a good Iowa defense, you're on the road, weather could be tough, but you only have to score 14 or more points to win the game, I think Oregon's going to be able to do that. They should be able to do that. Even against a good Iowa defense, the expectation should be they can get to at least 20 points in any given game. There should not be a team with the way that Oregon recruits and the amount of talent they have and all that There should not be a team that keeps the Oregon offense under 20 points. I know Indiana did that. And how did we all feel about the offense after that game? So winning the rushing battle, I think, is going to be key number one, regardless of what this game looks like on TV or how it feels to be there in Iowa City playing in whatever kind of the weather conditions are. Key number two, start strong. Start strong. I mentioned earlier this week, I think on Monday's show maybe, that this would probably be one of my keys to the game. And lo and behold, here we are. My thoughts have not changed as they have marinated and developed throughout the week, because that crowd at Kinnick is really, really good. And this does tie back to what I was talking about in the first segment with Dante Moore. That offense against Indiana that Oregon had didn't play well. Actually got off to a good start after the first drive. They scored in the first quarter, but then Oregon kind of lost control offensively, and Indiana's complicated pressures and all that really got to Dante Moore, and he stopped seeing the field well. And so even though against Penn State, the Oregon offense had just 3 points in the first half, I felt good about how they were, as good as you can with a 3-point first half. I felt okay about the way things were going because I didn't think the moment looked too big for Dante Moore or that he was overwhelmed, who, by the way, I have no expectation of him not playing in this game after not finishing the game against Wisconsin. Lanning said he could go back in. I think Dante Moore will be just fine. But if Dante Moore goes in, on the first drive, is picked off, or if he's stripped, if he's under pressure in a significant way, I trust Oregon's defense. I think this more applies to the offense, the starting strong. Obviously, you want to do well on both sides of the ball at all times, but top key, I'd say, is Oregon's offense getting off to a good start, to let Dante Moore settle into the game, to let Dante Moore feel like things are slowing down, get the crowd out of it as much as you can early on, and make them fight for moments to really turn up the noise in Kinnick Stadium. So that's key number two. And then key number three, avoid the big mistakes. Because this kind of ties back to the crowd factor I was just talking about. That place will go crazy. Absolutely crazy. And things can start to snowball, and you have to really try and dig deep. And this is a very young team. I would not want to see this particular Oregon team get down 10 points because of an early, interception, fumble, block punt, big return, anything like that. I wouldn't want to see how they try and come back from that, especially if it's harder to throw the football because it's raining. So throughout the game, you have to make Iowa earn. If I was going to beat you, and they absolutely can, if I was going to beat you, you've got to do it. You've got to make them do it in a way where they work for everything. You cannot, what just popped into my head when talking about this, the Oregon State collapse in Corvallis in 2022. What did Oregon do in that game? Dropped a punt that the punter was trying to catch from the long snapper at the 1 yard line. That is literally handing them a touchdown. Special teams returns that gave the Beavers great field position. Those are the sorts of things, moments, mistakes that Oregon just flat out cannot have, especially when they're on the road. And it's not like there are a lot of games where you are okay with those things happening, but this wasn't one of my keys against Rutgers or against, Oregon State or anybody like that, because I felt like there was a bigger margin for error. You don't have as big a margin for error here against a good Iowa team on the road. You have to make them work for it, because I do not believe the Iowa offense can consistently go up and down the field on this Oregon defense. I think the Ducks are too good on that side of the ball. So if you avoid big mistakes, don't throw an interception, throw the ball away and punt sometimes. That's okay. That's okay, because you've got to trust that the defense is not going to allow more than one touchdown drive in this game, and I don't think that they will. So just to recap, 3 keys: win the rushing battle, start strong, avoid the big mistakes. Oregon does 2 at least, or even all 3 of those things, I think they'll win the game. And again, I've got them winning 24-13. That's how you get it done. It's that simple. It's old Moneyball line. It's not that hard, Scott. Tell them, Wash. It's incredibly hard. Hey, anything worth doing is. So, Oregon had another transfer, and I've got playoff talk. How about that? First, this episode brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time that you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. I will be talking about the Oregon basketball game against Rice later tonight as this show airs. And TK Simpkins delivered the go-ahead bucket against Hawaii earlier this week. It was a win. It was a win. It was needed. Simpkins led the way in scoring for the Ducks. Speaking of scoring, I would like to see them do more of it against the Owls. Let's not violate Josh Pate's rule number 1. Don't lose to food. Do not lose to food. Hopefully Oregon gives Duck fans a stress-free win after the game later tonight. Just like TK Simpkins delivered when it mattered most for Oregon on Tuesday, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day. Only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Check out DoorDash today. So Dakota Fields left Oregon, is going to leave Oregon. Not clear. This one's a little weird. Fields was a 4-star recruit in the class of 2024, one of the higher-rated defensive back recruits in that particular cycle. And when Dan Lanning was asked about it, said that he just didn't show up for work, was the phrase that Dan Lanning used, and that's just kind of how it goes. So it kind of seems like Fields left and didn't tell anybody? I don't know. It's definitely a strange situation, but dude's plenty talented. If you go watch his high school film, you'll be plenty impressed. He's a guy that I think Oregon fans were understandably excited to get when he committed to Oregon way back when. Feels like a lifetime ago. But this is reflective. You know, he's going to transfer, and Jaleel Florence is going to transfer as well. This is reflective. Like, both those guys have the ability to be starting caliber corners. We know that Jaleel Florence can because he was on a team that went to the Pac-12 championship game. RIP. That these two guys are transferring out, or, you know, you could look at some other examples like Roderick Pleasant is playing down at UCLA. The Bruins are not a great team, but Roderick Pleasant's playing. He's a starter. He's good. He's a good player. I think Cole Martin plays in that secondary as well. And Jaleel Florence ending up at UCLA feels inevitable, right? Like, there's no other spot. He's from California. Every other former Oregon DB, the run of Oregon DBs to transfer from the program and wind up at UCLA since Dan Lanning arrived goes like this. Jalen Davies, there's a throwback name. Brian Addison, Cole Martin wound up there. He went to Arizona State first. And Roderick Pleasant. Those aren't the only players. Those are just the defensive backs. So I'll throw that one out there. But that Fields and Florence are both saying they're going to leave is reflective of how much talent is in that defensive secondary. And I think as well, they're aware of how much talent is coming in for the class of 2026. So I think that this group and the wide receiver group are just getting talent in a way, especially the receiver room. But the way that Chris Hampton, the secondary coach, has elevated the profile of Oregon as a defensive back recruiting school is really, really good. Because ordinarily, Fields is a guy that you would want to hold on to, that you'd really need to hold on to. He might be playing right now in a different era of Oregon football, but that's just where things are at. Like, Naeem Offord plays sparingly. You know, he's a true freshman, of course, but the highest rated DB commit in Oregon history. He's playing some, but not a ton. And you look around at the youth of Oregon's 5 starting defensive backs, the most snapped ones this year, 3 of them are true redshirt freshmen. Aaron Flowers, true freshman. Ife Obadegwu, those guys are redshirt freshmen, and Brandon Finney's a true freshman. So I think that Fields probably just looked around and realized, he'd hardly played this year, under 20 snaps on the season. But I think that if this is the sort of guy that is leaving, it's reflective of, other guys are not leaving, first of all. And second of all, Those guys are really good. We're already seeing how good they are, but then there's another crop of guys. Dorian Brew and Trey McNutt, couple of true freshmen, got hurt before the season or during the season or fall camp. Anyway, there are a lot of options. So I don't think this is crippling to Oregon's future depth in the defensive backfield. I wish Dakota Fields and Jalil Florence nothing but the best. I'm sure they'll go somewhere. They'll be playing, and we'll look up one day and go, oh, yeah, former Duck. And they're probably going to be doing pretty well. So, a couple questions here about the playoff. The Soda Report sends this one in. Hey, Spencer, question for you about the new CFP ranking. Do you think Ole Miss is ranked appropriately? No. The committee obviously did not give credit to Oregon for beating number 3 Penn State because they imploded, which means they should do the same thing for Ole Miss beating LSU, in my opinion. This leaves number 11 Oklahoma as their only ranked win. Thoughts? Yeah, even with that qualifier, I'd say that's, justification for the committee putting Ole Miss ahead of Oregon. Ole Miss is at 6. It does feel high. And I agree there's a disconnect there. But Oklahoma beating Tennessee last weekend on the road, I think did Ole Miss a lot of favors. So, my initial reaction, as you just heard, obviously, was no, I don't think Ole Miss is properly ranked. But then you look at the resume and you go, well, who are you going to put ahead of them? Because they do have a win over Oklahoma. You could make the case for BYU. That's fine. But Oregon currently doesn't have a win as good as Ole Miss beating Oklahoma. So I don't have a major objection to it, honestly. I do get the sense, though, because they struggled so much with Washington State. They did have Georgia on the ropes as well on the road. So for whatever the phrase quality loss is worth, I think that Oregon and Ole Miss's quality loss probably nets itself out. And then the committee, clearly, with Oregon being ranked number 9, doesn't view Penn State as a top 5 win. I do. But does the committee? No, obviously. Which magnifies the importance of winning this game against Iowa, because Oregon is, if they're to wind up 10-2, going to be fighting a perception battle. Well, the perception right now is, Oregon hasn't played anyone. And I think from a perception standpoint, it is worse if Oregon loses this week but wins their final 3 against Minnesota, USC, and Washington than if they win this week, maybe lose to USC or Washington at the end. There's also the counteracting weight there of, recency bias for a loss, and losing early is not as damaging to a team as losing late. Notre Dame is proof positive of that. But, yeah, I don't think that Ole Miss is horribly ranked in that spot. I do think the LSU win is not being treated the same as Penn State. But, the Oklahoma win justifies them being above Oregon. Gavin sends this one in. SSA, Oregon will not make the college football playoff if they are 10-2. I've been getting a lot of questions about this, and the more I think about it, the more I'm sticking with my initial thought. Your SSA, Gavin, is that Oregon will not make the playoff if they are 10-2. That is a 3.5. I did not say 1, but I did not say 10. So I want to do the reverse SSA to talk about it like this. SSA, Oregon makes the playoff at 10-2, 6.5. I am that much more confident because 5 is right down the middle of I think this is just as likely to happen as not. The SSA of Oregon makes the playoff at 10-2 is a 6.5. I think so. Am I intensely confident? No, because you never know what's going to happen in the rest of college football. But am I more confident than not? Yes. Yes, I absolutely. And 10-2 Oregon should be in. The more that you hear national discussion, this stuff, you can argue whether or not it should matter. It absolutely does. The more you hear anyone talk about how tough Oregon's schedule in the month of November is, the better that is. Oklahoma being ranked as high as they are, sometimes eye test applies, Notre Dame. Sometimes schedule applies, Oklahoma. Because what was the narrative about Oklahoma coming into this year? Man, they have a brutal schedule, which they did. And they're sitting there at 2 losses. So why is Oklahoma as high as they are? And Notre Dame is sitting there at number 10. They applied more eye test to Notre Dame, and they applied more resume test, I believe, to Oklahoma. So The narrative surrounding Oregon's schedule, as I discussed earlier this week, is good because you have 3 ranked teams from the committee's first rankings. And I believe that they will all be ranked at the time that they play Oregon. I think Oregon will beat Iowa this week. Maybe that drops them out of the rankings. Maybe it doesn't. I believe USC will beat Iowa when they play. That'll keep USC inside the top 20. And then Washington will probably get enough chaos, win their next 3 games, and be inside the top 20 when they play the Ducks. That's my gut suspicion here. So the playoff ramifications this week against Iowa, very, very real. Oregon 24-13. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And go Ducks.